I'd like to introduce you to Christopher Wood. Christopher's part of an extraordinary team of people that we've had the pleasure of working with now for several years at Dow Chemical. They've rolled Adept out to 8,000 users worldwide. Chris is returning here this year to share all the new ways Dow is deploying Adept in different systems across the globe, including an as-built system that contains over 40 major sites, over 3.2 million in version documents, and 3 terabytes of content, plus replication. Please join me in welcoming Chris up to the stage. Have fun.
All right. So no pressure, right? So first off, I'd like to thank everybody for coming here. It's a pleasure to come back and present again. Martha did a great job in setting everything up. And one of the things she does when she schedules is, she's got a lot of great people presenting. And there have been so many good presentations already. They keep raising the bar. And so what she does strategically is she has me come up so it's my turn to lower the bar. Okay, so I'd like to talk to you about what we've done at Dow, some of the things that we're doing, and also share a little bit of some of the things that we've learned along the way. Perhaps it'll be interesting. So my name is Christopher Wood. I am the Adept support SME. So basically, I'm the person taking care of our servers, doing the software upgrades, working on deploying the desktop clients, those sorts of things. I have a varied background. It's difficult to pigeonhole me as any one thing. I spent some time in the Navy. I spent 20 plus years working in the oil field. I've done various IT roles, etc. I could best be described as kind of a jack of all trades. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a database guy. I'm not a reports guy. I'm not an IT guy. I'm not a network guy. But I dabble with a little bit of everything. So one of the things I learned from my grandfather, I'm fairly ignorant myself, but I've got a lot of very intelligent help. And so when I'm up here presenting for you, don't think that what I'm presenting is what I did. I'm just a small part of a very talented team. So we have 4 members from Dow here today, but we've still got another 7 or 8 people back at different sites. So we have Teresa Yang, Randy Nettles, and Jonathan Mullins here as well. So this is all really a team effort. Don't think that I did it by myself. And if I say I instead of we, just substitute we, okay? So just to recap, some of you have seen this before, but the Dow story, we started, we've got a timeline here. They started with the Six Sigma study way back in 2010, and they spent over a year doing an evaluation, trying to figure out what can they do to help Dow's business. And they came up with the conclusion that having a single engineering document management solution to replace the file shares and all the various homegrown solutions and aging solutions, that would be a really good thing. So they made the decision based on a Six Sigma study. Then they launched off with an effort to do requirements gathering, and they did a study and evaluation. They looked at everything on the market. They created these elaborate, massive Excel spreadsheets with every possible requirement that we could have. They had everything was weighted. They graded everything. They looked at all these different products, and they finally said, okay, they came up with 3 viable candidates. And they went to each of the companies, the vendors, and said, we'd like to do a test implementation. And 2 of the candidates said, okay, sure. And a month later, we're still struggling to try and get a system up and running. Synergist came on board and said, okay, we can help you. 3 days later, we had a system up and running where we could start doing the test and evaluation. So the flexibility and the ease of implementation was one of the key factors in making the decision for Synergist. Once we'd made that decision, we immediately started to launch our RTIP. Wait, that's not as-built. We implemented a completely different system. We spent a year getting requirements, but we had this emergent requirement that came out. They said, we have a different need. Can you do something to help us? Basically, RTIP is this project that was a joint venture between Dow and Saudi Aramco. And we'd done all this engineering work, and they needed a vehicle to package all this documentation and transmit it to the joint venture. And in a matter of a couple of weeks, we put together this RTIP system, and then we started loading documents, etc. Then we implemented our as-built system. And as we implemented the as-built is kind of our crown jewel, I think. It's just a continuous process since then of locating different sites. We looked at all the sites, we evaluated what they were doing, how much content they had, what the risk was of them continuing, and then we graded it and said, okay, these are the sites we're going to start with first, second, third, etc. And we're still migrating. Okay, so the as-built system, actually the RTIP system was so successful that as soon as we got the as-built going, they came up and said, hey, well, we've got another project. We do a lot of project work. And it's very similar with the system that you're using for RTIP. Could we create a project system, something to manage our capital projects, exchange of documents with vendors, supplier document control, issue for construction, and all of that? So we implemented our third system, the Adept Capital Project System. Okay, so everything's great. We're looking around, what can we do to make improvement? A couple of years ago, I reported what we'd done in terms of a custom reporting solution. My belief is if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So we put together a portal system where we could get metrics and evaluate usage, etc. So we did that and we presented that. I'll be happy to talk to you about that offline. Next, we worked with Synergis. We found that some of these large migrations were somewhat painful, and we engaged with Synergis, specifically with Charlie and with Andrew Cummings, who did a brilliant job in programming a tool for us. So we now have a custom tool, which can also be available for you folks, I believe, where we can take, we can import 200,000 documents in a matter of 3 hours, which is a lot faster than doing it via the UGLA, scan and sync, if you've ever done that. And then we also focused on data quality tools because we noticed that our metadata needed some improvement. So I presented that last year, and I'll be happy to discuss that at length later. Okay. Our next major thing was we wanted to upgrade from Adept 2013 to 2017. And if you've never done a large-scale system migration, the first time you do it, it's a little bit intimidating. So we spent a lot of time, we planned in great detail, and then we did this really successful upgrade to 2017. Now we were starting to see a little bit of performance. Yeah, Todd, performance is an issue. And so we started looking around, and finally we got some new hardware for our as-built system. So in December we concurrently jumped to our new hardware, and we also upgraded to 2018 Update 1. Now, when we upgraded the hardware, that left us with some servers. Great, I can finally retire those old servers. I want to get rid of them, right? Well, immediately somebody said, hold on, we have a new implementation. We got a completely new usage for Adept. There's a thing called Met Portal, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, so I can repurpose some of those old servers I was going to scrap, and we put out this Met Portal system. Okay, great, I'm done. All right. Well, no, we got this new system. We got another system we want to roll out. We're going to call it Unit Workbook, and we'll discuss that in a little bit as well. Okay, fine. I managed to scrounge out these old servers, and I got systems up and running. We got to replace them at some point because they're 2008, but at least we have the systems out there right now. And then we're done, right? Well, no. We got this other requirement that came out called Digital GPM. So this is yet another implementation of Adept, which is a completely different usage, and so we now have this other system. Whew, man, that's, what is that, five different Adept implementations. Now remember, all of these, some of them have a development and a test and production environment and so forth, so there's quite a bit of stuff going on. And wait, no, sorry. Just a couple of months ago, we decided that our as-built system, as it was as a monolithic single implementation, wasn't going to improve its performance sufficiently, so we decided to split our as-built system into a European system and a North American-centric system. So we split the systems. And as we speak, we're in the process of implementing a brand new implementation to host our as-built content in Asia. So we're still doing more stuff. Now we've done that over time. We've done that with a small team. Recently, this year we've almost doubled our team, but we've had, for the most part, we've had 4 or 5 people doing all of this different work. All right. To give you an idea, this is for all of our combined systems, this is a depiction of the growth in document counts. This is for the N versions of documents. If you counted the versions of documents, we've got well over 4.5 million documents. We just finished a migration on Thursday, 200,000 documents. That took us actually over 3.5 million in documents. Now, of those, I would generously say about 150,000 of those documents are contained within the capital project system, the MET portal, the digital GPM, and the unit workbook. Everything else is in as-built. So let me get off script here for just a moment. Can I have a show of hands? Who, when they were in their 11th grade high school, told their guidance counselor, when I grow up, I want to be a document management specialist? Okay, now, as Paul pointed out this morning, we've ended up where we are in terms of a series of choices, some forced, some chosen, but we are where we are. And document management isn't considered to be a really glamorous field. We've also had discussions, we touched a little bit on it earlier in the morning, but we've had discussions where typically we want to provide an ROI. What's the benefit of using this system? How do we justify that to management? And I'd like to try and challenge you to think of things slightly differently. So there's a technical term. If you have the chaos that was discussed earlier, you have documents in file shares or in old systems or documents that are on people's workstations, or you don't know what you've got. What you have is technically referred to as a bunch of stuff. Okay? Now when you consolidate that and you start bringing it into a single managed system, all of a sudden what you really have is a thing. You've got a collection, and it's really an asset. And so when you're talking to your management, they don't appreciate the value of document management. But if you took the average of any of the documents that you have, okay, I have how many hours of draftsman's time creating the drawing? I've got how much time doing quality checks? I've got how much time updating these documents? I've got how much time or how much value of intellectual property? Do you think that your average document is worth at least $1,000? Or you think your documents are less than that? If you think your document's at least $1,000, raise your hand, on average. Okay, you could probably justify, some people say, hey, our stuff is special, it's $2,000 or $5,000. But your documents have at least a value of $1,000 or so. And so Con Edison, I think, was telling me last night, they've got over 1 million documents. So 1,000 times 1 million, you are managing a $1 billion asset that your company may not even recognize.
I need a raise.
You do. So when you start to look at it, it's not just about the ROI, it's about what is the value of what you have? What would it cost your company to recreate what you've got? So you need to remember, even though we might have found ourselves in a role where we're doing something that most people don't find glamorous, hey, what you're doing is important, and there's some real value there, okay? So I'm going to get back on script now. All right, so just to review these new implementations that we have, we've got one system which is called digital GPM. And what this is, within Dow, because they manage projects, they have defined global project methodologies. So whenever you're doing various projects, there are specified instructions and steps and standard ways of doing things. And so typically in the past they've had file shares and other things. And we've implemented an Adept solution where we're taking the instructions and the checklists and the guidelines. And at various points you have approval documents. You reach certain review gates. All of that content has been placed into Adept. And we created a custom front end, a custom web front end that's easy for the users to use. It gives a couple of different search vectors where they can look for documents associated with the project phase or the size of the document or the discipline. the dollar value of the document, keyword searches, etc. Responsibility matrices or whatever. So I'm not intending you to read all this stuff, just to give you an idea that we've got different views. They can come in, they can put in some criteria, they do a search, and we deliver to them the documents using the Adept backend. The main takeaway points is that we're using a custom web end to make it easy for the users to find what they're looking for without a lot of training. We're using Adept as the backend, and we're also using it for all of the administrative functions. For this system, we've probably got 15 to 20,000 users worldwide, and I don't want to be the admin who's got to register all these people, and we use Active Directory. So one of the things we developed was a component which will auto-enroll somebody. If a new user goes to that website without even logging in, we're using their credentials to determine, do they already have access? If not, we automatically add them to the Active Directory group, and we import them into Adept. So it's automatic, it's seamless. They don't have to put in a request and wait 3 days to have the request fulfilled. It's instantaneous. The other thing we did was we also did some custom reporting where we're tracking each page hit, we're tracking each search result, each download, et cetera, so we can get the metrics, because believe it or not, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? We have another system called the Adept Unit Workbook. Again, working with projects, the project managers all have Excel. It's amazing how much, even in a company like Dow, Excel runs everything. They've all got their customized workbooks based on disciplines where they're tracking estimates of hours and resource usage and all this stuff. And then what they were doing was they were manually re-entering all of that data into a SharePoint site so that they could make reports. And they contacted the Adept team, can you do something to help us? And so what we decided to do is to leverage Adept's extraction capability from Excel, where we basically took their worksheets, they've got standard worksheets by discipline, we put a master worksheet on the front of it, and then we linked cells to the master, and then we mapped the cells in the master so we can put the document into Adept, extract it, populate the database, and then give a reporting visualization team access to the database so they can create all the graphics and displays and dashboards they want. We also integrated with SAP where we can import the data, so then they get the final numbers for the project, and then they can compare what was the estimate versus what was the actuals. So this is just a depiction of one of the standard worksheets that a project manager might fill out. But at the front, we have a single spreadsheet that links all of that data together. So simply, we take take the workbook, we put it in Adept, so now the workbook's also being managed. We insert it into Adept, we extract the data into the database. Boom, there you go, we get these dashboards. And so we've got an easy way to remove the data reentry, et cetera. Just another set of dashboards that we're looking at. Okay. The key points here, we use standardized discipline files, so each discipline has their own file, their own spreadsheet. They can customize it as they need. We're using the mapped master data sheet, and we're using named cells within Excel so that when you put the document in, we can map it and extract the data. All right, the next system that we have is this MET portal. MET stands for Most Effective Technology. And what we're doing is we're working to replace an existing static website that basically had both HTML and Word documents. Again, we've created a custom front end because this particular system may have 20 to 25,000 potential users when it gets fully deployed. And we want an easy to use website that they can just go and look for their stuff. The key points about this, one challenge that we have is because this thing grew organically, you've got HTML and you've got Word documents, and within the Word documents, they have hyperlinks to other Word documents inside the system. And so now we've got to find a way of locating those hyperlinks and updating them so that they'll work inside of the new environment. Another challenge that we had was that these Word documents that describe these best practices and this effective technology, sometimes there are designer notes that we want available, but we don't want everybody to see. We only want people with specific authorization to see the designer notes. And we worked with Synergis, and we had a custom plugin for Publish Wave. So when we put the document into Adept, we can actually create two different versions. One that's restricted that does show the designer notes. The other, in Publish Wave, those designer notes are suppressed. Now, to be honest, right now we have two different systems between GPM and Met Portal. But as we're looking at it, we're seeing that the infrastructure and there's a huge overlap between the potential user groups. So we're looking at maybe we really want to just roll this functionality into the GPM system that we've got. All right. So that's a little bit about the different systems we're working on at this point. Now to some learnings and observations. When we started with as-built, the plan was to have a single monolithic global system. One site or one location, one set of servers that's going to have all the content for everything in the world. That's a great vision. 8,000 users, 3,000 terabytes of data plus replication, etc. And we found out that it didn't really work out as well as we had hoped. So I have a colleague back in Houston. He and I sort of challenge each other. We piddle with data science and things like that. So I worked out, came up with this visualization. It's a little hard to read, but what it is on the left axis you've got time. On the right axis we've got locations. And what I did was I created this visualization showing the number of views per day based on location. And so what you can see is, so each day it's got a semi-transparent little dot, which is the size of the dot represents the number of views. And so you can see where you've got these huge burn-ins, you know, that's sites that are using the system a lot. But we had one site in particular, Stade in Germany. And when we started doing the analysis, we saw that initially they started using it, but then it sort of started tapering off. And that wasn't commensurate with the business that they've got, so we said, hey, wait a minute, what's going on? And so we started looking and doing some investigation. And anecdotally, we're being told that the people that have Adept in Europe, they're pulling stuff out and they're going back to file shares. Adept is just too slow, so what can we do? Well, we said, well, okay, obviously, let's set up replication servers. That helped a little bit. Let's do local data caches. That also helped a little bit. We did some preliminary testing and trying to get some performance metrics. And we talk about performance, but you know, we really don't define what do we mean by performance. But we tried. We were trying to get various metrics. So let's have a WebEx with 5 different people in different parts of the world and ask them to do something and time it, because I've got to time it on my watch here. It's very difficult to get accurate timings of things. So we got some information, but I wished it had been better. Nevertheless, we concluded that, hey, we've either got a network problem or we've got a hardware problem. And the path of least resistance was to replace the hardware. Although the path of replacing the hardware was more difficult than we thought, it took quite a bit of time to get the hardware, the new servers. So we decided we're going to upgrade these new servers. We engaged with Synergis, and the mantra was more cores, more RAM, solid-state disks. Do whatever you can to increase your speed there. That'll help your performance as much as you can on the server side. So that was our mantra. And one observation, a personal observation, is that the delta in cost between getting 48 gigs of RAM versus 64 gigs of RAM is probably much less than the net total cost of the time of all the people involved in the various meetings so we could discuss over and over and over, why do you need this much RAM? It would have been far cheaper just to go out and buy it. So my recommendation, don't get engaged in the discussions, just go out and do it. Okay. All right. So we did upgrade. We did that back in December. And then we also upgraded not only the hardware, but we also upgraded to 2018. And then we started doing some more tests. The performance that we got, although improved, still wasn't what we wanted. So we did some more testing, and we did some ping time testing. This is easy to understand. We got our central server is located in Michigan. And if you pinged the server from Michigan, from the site in Michigan, you get less than 2 milliseconds. Hey, that's pretty cool. In Ontario, in St. Clair, Ontario, 32 seconds of ping time. Down in Houston, we're at 43 milliseconds ping time. But just down the road from Houston, you have Freeport, Lake Jackson. That's up to 51. Even closer to Houston, as Deer Park, it's at 55. Okay, so you can tell just from this, the network's not stellar. Over in Terneuzen, it was 120 milliseconds. In Stade, which is not that far from Terneuzen, it's 147 milliseconds average. And over in Chennai, 275 milliseconds. So that's just ping time. But what does that tell us? Well, with 2018, one of the fantastic features that's now part of the desktop client, and I hope they'll implement something similar to this in the web client, you have a standard performance test. I don't know if you've seen it or not. I'd highly recommend you take a look at it. The performance test, essentially what we did was we developed a standard protocol for testing. And then we can run the same test consistently over and over and over, so we're always comparing apples to apples. And we used the integrated Adept performance test to conduct our testing. So if you're not familiar with it, you can go to Options, Troubleshooting, and select Performance Test. Options, Troubleshooting, and then down at the bottom there's a Performance Test button. And what that does is it opens up a screen, and you can define the work area that you want, you can define the library that you're putting the documents into, and you can also define a directory, presumably on your local PC, where you have a stash of files. And then when you run the test, it's going to copy those files in, go through a whole series of events, operations, and it's going to record the information for you. So then we created a standard set of files. I would consider them for us our golden set. So we always use the same files for the tests. We've got a mixture of DGN, DWG, Excel, PDF, etc. Different sizes. We use 10 standard files. Now when you run the test, it comes back and it either opens in Excel or in Notepad, a really nice report, so that for each phase of the test, for each document, it gives you how long in milliseconds it took to complete that phase. Okay? Now, because we're running this across multiple locations, a bunch of these tests, we put together a small database so we could pull all this stuff in, and then we could spit out some data to make sense of it. And this is what we got. Here we're seeing various locations around the world. And this is the amount of time in milliseconds that it took to complete this complete test. And you can also see each of the different phases in different colors here. I cheated. I wanted to know if I wanted to get rid of all network latency, how can I measure what the optimal test would be? Run it on the server. And it took 3.4 minutes for me to run on the server. I'd like it to be faster, but hey, 3.4 minutes, okay? 4.3 minutes to run it in the location in Midland, not on the server. In Houston, it took us 11 minutes. In Deer Park, it takes 20 minutes. In Terneuzen, it takes 30 minutes. Stade is 38. And 62 minutes in Chennai, India. Would any of you be happy with 62 minutes to run a standard test that checks in, checks out 10 files? Okay. Now, using this information and also using the ping time information, one of the things we did was put together a small little chart where we can explain to management, look, if I plot the ping time versus the time it took to perform the test, you can see there's a lot of variation. I mean, people have different PCs, different processors, different amount of RAM. Even if they've got the same amount of RAM, they've got different processes going on, so the amount of available RAM differs. So it's hard to get really good, accurate, consistent results. So there is some scatter. But you can see there's almost a linear correlation between ping time and the overall performance test. And so based on this information, what we decided to do was, look, we got to do something. We got to help the people in Europe. What made sense was we have actionable information. Let's go ahead and split our as-built system into European and North American systems. And in order to do that, basically what we did, we had a satellite already over there. Kind of tough getting new servers sometimes, but the new satellite server we got last year was fairly robust. 16 core, 64 gigs of RAM. It was adequate, and we're also reducing the load on it. So we implemented this as a single stack. Instead of having the vault and the web and everything on different machines, we put it all on one machine. In order to actually do that, we took our existing system, we cloned the database, copied it over, set it up, and then we went through and removed the security, removed the excess libraries, and we're still working on removing some of the excess users. But basically, we copied it, and then we cut out the stuff we didn't need for the European system, and we do the same thing on the US side. And we're doing all of this via the UGLA just to make sure we don't screw things up. All right. The result was that Randy Nettles, our colleague from Deer Park, was actually going over to Europe and visited there, and they're very delighted with the new performance in Europe because we took their performance test from 30 minutes down to 6 minutes. They're pretty happy. Now that actually kind of works against us a little bit because we want to do some more things, and they're saying, well, hey, but it's good enough now. So all the other things we're looking at, okay. So as a result of this, what we're also looking at now is we're seriously considering for our North American system, we may want to go ahead and split it between a North America North and a North America South so we can try and improve the performance for Deer Park and other locations. So those are some things that we're looking at. But by using the test, we can collect the actionable data that tries to help justify to our management what we're doing. All right. Some other performance issues. When we set up the as-built system, we went down to our Freeport location as our first location, and we looked at their complex title blocks, and we decided we wanted to extract every bit of information from the title block that we could. So we implemented it that way. And as we were looking at the results of our performance testing, we noticed that the phases of the test where extraction was being conducted is actually taking a lot longer than some of the other phases. So we started thinking, well, you know, how much does extraction impact our overall performance? We also identified that, you know, there's probably a lot of fields that we're extracting that we may not really need. The reason why are we extracting all this stuff is simple, because we could. But do we really need it? So we started questioning that. Inside of our as-built system, we got over 240 fields. 113 are mapped as extractable, trying to pull everything we can get. But then we started looking and saying, well, how much are they being used? How populated are they? And so it's easy enough to run a chart. Here you can see 0 to 100% on the left. The different fields, I'm not listing all the fields, but representatively you can see very quickly we get to a point where, you know, 70% of our fields are populated less than 30% of the time. If you look at where the 10% cutoff is, I mean, fully half of our fields are populated less than 10% of the time. And yet we're still expending resources when we're putting a document in where it's trying to check that field to see if there's data to extract. So we tried to make some evaluations and said, well, could we cut back on our extraction? Would that help? We looked at the fields that we were extracting, and we came up with a pool of them that said, well, maybe we don't really need these. And then we did some testing. And so we did a baseline test, and this was to our test environment. The baseline gives you an idea we're somewhere around 600,000 milliseconds or whatever. We removed 1/3 of the fields we thought we could get rid of, and we can see, yeah, there's a little bit of improvement there. Okay, let's remove another third. It's not quite so clear there. Again, there's some randomness, there's time of day. If there's impeachment hearings on TV or something, then people are live streaming that in the office and sucking up the bandwidth and all this other stuff. Then we removed all of the fields we thought we really didn't need, and you know what? Doing that minimum extraction does make a bit of difference. It can improve your performance. And then we said, is there anything else we can do? Thumbnails. Let's remove thumbnails. Let's turn off thumbnail extraction. See if that'll help. And what you can see is that by removing all the stuff that we didn't think we needed, plus cutting out the thumbnails, we can improve the performance of our performance test by a full 20 to 30%. One other thing, as far as these performance tests are concerned, I should have made the point earlier, when we were looking at our performance test for all of the different locations, we go and talk to our IT people and say, hey, we need to do something to improve the network. It's too slow. And they say, what's your performance criteria? And we say, huh? What do you mean? What's our performance criteria? Well, you have to have a performance criteria. You've got to have something measurable for us to be able to say, this is what it has to be. Well, if you remember the slide where we had the performance criteria, we had the tests of the different locations, we could draw an arbitrary line wherever we say it is, say this point, 5 minutes. We want all people to be able to perform the test within 5 minutes. That's our performance criteria. I remember a number of years ago, a friend of mine got audited by the IRS. And the agent doing the auditing was saying, okay, show me the receipts. So he's pulling out receipts and stuff, handing them. And the IRS agent commented, you know, it's not my job to make sure the ink is dry. It's just to make sure you have it. And so similarly, the IT folks, when we say, hey, we need to improve the performance, they can't really challenge us on what we say our criteria is. But using this test, you have the ability to define what your performance criteria is, and then you have something where you can tangibly go back to that group and say, hey, we need to make some choices. So as a result of this testing on extraction, we've got some actionable information. We do believe that performance is impacted by network. We think that the extraction is also sensitive to network speeds. We also believe we may be over-extracting at this point. Thumbnails, I don't want to tell you, hey, just go turn off your thumbnails. You all need to make your own decisions. Be aware. If you decide to make a big thumbnail so that you can read it, it's going to take a huge amount of space in your database. If you want to save space in your database and you make it smaller, you can't read it. And if you choose to extract thumbnails, it does come at a performance cost. So if you're in a location where you don't have performance issues, extract away. I mean, it's easy. But if you're finding challenges like we are, consider turning them off. So we believe that if we do make these changes, we can improve our performance globally by 30% or more. And at this point, our team is working to build consensus with our users rather than our team saying, okay, we've got the solution, we're just going to access stuff, no question, no discussion. We're trying to engage them and encourage them to support that decision. Okay. So just to recap, we did review the Dow story. We've looked at the fact that we've got multiple implementations, a lot of stuff going on. We're continuing to grow our document base tremendously. Our user base is growing. We looked at some of the new implementations, the custom web front ends. We're leveraging the extraction capabilities so that we can reduce data reentries and things like that. And then in terms of learnings and observations, again, use the performance testing. It can really help provide concrete data. It can provide information which will affect your architectural decisions of how you want to put things. If you need to slice your system up, how would you go about doing that? And also just think about what you really need to extract. I mean, at the end of the day, the reason of extracting the metadata is so people can search on it. Are people really going to be searching for approved by initials or things like that? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on your use case. So at that point, I'll open it up to questions.
More than a question, but the extraction, I kind of look at it, does the data need to be on the drawing? If it's valuable to put on the drawing, extract it. But if you don't need it on the drawing, don't make the drawing your database. Let the database do its job, extract what you need, search on it, and then leave everything else just as a field.
Hi, I'm Anna Lear from the National Radio Astronomy Observatory. I'm curious about the Adept, the custom Adept implementations. Where did the requests or the impetus come from to get these going in the organization?
Within Dow, they have various leadership groups, and so what had happened? They didn't come to me. They went to actually, they went to the prior project owner for Adept, or the program owner for Adept, and the various leadership groups said, hey, we need to have a dashboard that does this, or we need to have a replacement for this aging system of that nature. So, and today those requests go through Teresa Yang, who's sitting right here.
Okay, and then kind of a follow-up to that. So these people were familiar with Adept already, or was it somebody else's idea to say, hey, we could integrate that with Adept?
It varies a little bit. In some cases, they have the different managers are in meetings and they're discussing, hey, we need to do this. And I think Greg, our previous project owner, was saying, we might be able to do that with Adept.
Okay.
In other cases, the leaders were already aware of Adept, and they were saying, okay, well, let's maybe we can use that as our solution rather than coming up with something different.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Chris. Mike O'Connor from Newton Erickson. Your 4 people that you had on your development team to begin, what were their backgrounds? Or if you had to build an Adept team to implement with, what kind of backgrounds would you look for?
So one of the core members who's been on the team all along has been Randy Nettles. And Randy's a software developer who's also been engaged in developing previous document management systems, et cetera. So he's got a lot of experience in that area. Jonathan Mullins, also on the team. He's got a background in theater arts, but he's especially good in terms of our training and working as a frontline support. And he was working in a role where he was managing the document room there in Deer Park. So we had Greg Schuler, who many of you may have met previously, not Craig Schuler, but Greg Schuler from Dow, was extremely dynamic, and he was a kind of a driving force to push things forward. Obviously, you need some people with some technical skills, but the majority of people that we've recently added are more project management people, because what we're looking at are people who are trying to engage with the customer base or user base for existing sites where we have hundreds of thousands of documents that need to be integrated and brought into the system. So the question is, how do we interact with them and encourage them to adopt Adept, and how do we technically execute a migration to catalog what they've got, get the metadata prepared, and then push the stuff in? So it would probably be, instead of a single type of person, it would probably be a mix, kind of a jack of all trades, sort of.
Curiosity seems to be an important attribute.
Well, thank you. So,
that it? We good? Final question? Everybody's ready for lunch. All right. Thank you, Chris.